Abhay Agarwal, Managing Director of Piper Serica Advisors, joining me now. I'm also speaking with Manpreet Gill, CIO of Africa, Middle East and Europe for Standard Chartered. Welcome to both of you and thank you so much for joining in on the conversation. Mr. Gill, let me come to you first. Is there still some hope out there that Trump won't go through? I mean, we've been speaking to people, and the fact that their Commerce Secretary has in an interview said that there's still some negotiations on. We know Donald Trump will be speaking with Justin Trudeau. The Mexican president has held off till Sunday. She's waiting for some kind of a negotiation. Is this not yet a done deal in terms of the first set of tariffs and counter tariffs, or are we hoping for too much?
Well, morning. I think calling it a done deal is difficult, because even if this is part of a negotiation, it's not credible unless it's seen as a permanent sort of imposition of tariffs. But I think a large part of the market, including us, would say, look, there are signs that at least part of this is aimed at reaching some sort of negotiated settlement that leads to a very different outcome for the US than where we are today. And that's, I think, why we're seeing the reaction from Canada and Mexico and indeed elsewhere. I think what we should do is, of course, not expect this to be a quick solution. Clearly, we know what the timelines are. We know there's a trade report and potential imposition of broader tariffs coming through in April. That by itself should not come as a surprise to markets. But when we sort of model, different scenarios of what the impact on global growth and inflation is, how long these stay in place is also an equally important question. So we know trade deals are not easy. And, we obviously don't have a tremendous insight into how quickly, leaders on both sides want to reach some sort of settlement. But I'd interpret it as a positive sign that some form of negotiations, are in place, because the quicker we get to some sort of solution and understanding of what the steady state looks beyond this escalatory cycle, I think the quicker markets will be able to, factor that in and move on to looking at what future earnings look like.
But, I'm just wondering whether we've seen any of these negotiations ending with Trump stepping down from his position or not. And I'll give you an example, and I'll come to Abhay Agarwal on that. The conversation with Zelensky in the White House a few days ago, difficult and painful to watch, really, with two world leaders talking like this. Today you're hearing Zelensky saying, okay, I want to make this right, let's come back and talk. So it's Trump pushing down, and so far it's the other side that comes back to the table to sign off on what Trump wants, or at least that's how they're presenting it. How does that work out in our context? Abhay Agarwal, let me take that question to you.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Tamanna. So I think from our perspective, in this whole global trade war, that tariff war that we have been caught up in, I think what is very important is for us to understand that India is still a very small part of the global trade system. And I think on a positive basis, what we have to look at is that how do opportunities emerge for us? So I think there is one recognition that the status quo that we have got used to cannot continue. We cannot take it for granted. So it is very important that as a growing economy, we have to secure our own supply chains. We cannot depend or cannot take it for granted that supply chains for basic stuff will always be available. So I think Make in India becomes even more imperative. I would expect to see from the government a lot of focus on Make in India now. It's a wake-up call. I hope it is seen as that. Secondly, from the import perspective, I think we have been importing a lot of stuff that we can make in India, cheap electronics, semiconductors, APIs.
It will take time. It will take time, and what we need to do perhaps is in the other. Are you saying we should double down on Make in India and say, okay, we don't want to import your stuff. You can impose whatever tariffs you want? Is that the approach?
I think that is the see, because the global tariffs, I think even from the US perspective, Tamanna, is an acknowledgement that they are not competitive manufacturers of stuff that they are importing. I mean, that the tariff amount, 10%, 20%, 25%, is basically a cost equalization. So it says that, look, I'm not competitive. You are a better, more competitive manufacturer, China, Canada, Mexico. So I'm going to now penalize you for your competitiveness. And this is completely opposite of what we were taught by US economists, that global trade is a win-win and it's not a win-lose. So the needle has swung on the other side. I don't think it will stay there for long. I think a lot of posturing is going into it right now to correct some of the by benefits that some countries are accruing. But right now there is collateral damage. My own expectation, Tamanna, is that all this will die down by mid-April at best. I think US will realize that they are causing a lot of damage to their own economy with inflation going up, bond yields going up, which is not something that they want, a very strong US dollar. So I think a lot of it will tame down. We're seeing early signs of that already over the last couple of days. If you see US market action across US bond yields, US dollar itself correcting, and the US markets correcting. So I think people will start looking beyond these tariff threats right now, and till something is done, I think the market mood will swing to look, till something is done, let's not worry about it, and let's see where the opportunities are. Tamanna, frankly, that's my view right now.
You know, this is so interesting when you say till something has done, because first it was, he's just talking about it, he doesn't mean it. Then he gave a date, and on that date he said, now I'm starting it. Now he is still starting it, he's done it, and retaliatory tariffs are coming in. I'm just wondering what else we're waiting for. Manpreet Gill, let me come to you. Just this question of, and Abhay is absolutely right, markets are saying let's wait and watch till something is done. What is that something that needs to be done to make people understand that he is serious about tariff threats? He wants to increase the tariffs that America imposes on other countries. Make in America is a big issue for him.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think it comes back to the point that even if this is part of a negotiating tactic, the threat has to be credible. There can be no sort of further step. These have to, from an American point of view, these would have to kick off and stay in place unless and until some other sort of, in order to really successfully trigger that negotiation. But I think it comes back to, the same point that I think it depends how long these stay in place. That's going to be an important factor. The other factor maybe we haven't discussed, and Abhay alluded to this, is, the market reaction. Because the fact that tariffs are kicking off, the fact that they're negative for growth and inflation, that's not a complete surprise to markets. But if we start to see this escalatory cycle continue and potentially extend, at some point markets are likely to worry. And the dollar is unlikely to get a lot weaker, which arguably is something policymakers in the US are not completely ignoring. So we know from past experience that policymakers do pay attention to the market reaction. So there is that sort of natural buffer. Hopefully we don't have to test that to its fullest extreme. But at the end of the day, what we're learning through at least the early stages is that, yes, I mean, that Trump and his administration are laying out these tariff policies, but clearly there are efforts to have some negotiation even as the retaliation comes through.
Okay.
How quickly, how soon is going to be important.
Okay, so let me ask a question from the Indian perspective, because that's the core question we're asking on the show, right? What can India do to weather the storm? And let me come to you first, Manpreet. Frankly, if a few more Harley Davidsons come into the country, it's fine. Let the Teslas also come in, let them compete with the others, that's okay. But beyond a point, is this a relatively easy negotiation for us because we started off with such higher tariffs? How do you see this panning out?
Well, I think in a number of ways it could, right? I mean, like you said, I think the starting point is much higher tariffs. The starting point is potentially a very different geopolitical context compared to perhaps the example you cited with Zelensky. So I think, look, is there room for a negotiated settlement? Chances are there are. I think the question is, where the give and take happens and what sort of equilibrium we ultimately settle at. Every economist will tell you that lower tariffs, in isolation are better for economic growth. So there's no harm in exploring that to some degree. I think the other angle, of course, we take is, as this process carries on, to what extent, is there an opportunity in markets? Let's not forget that Indian equities specifically have already priced in our view, quite a bit of that concern, if you look at the changes in earnings expectations. So I'm not sure we sort of have an immediate settlement sort of in front of us. Clearly, lots of levers and a position to take. From a US perspective, clearly, we can see where the priorities are in terms of where tariff pressures are coming in initially. It's much more in the immediate neighbors, much more, directed towards China, as we've heard from past rhetoric. So I guess that sort of, in relative terms at least, means, the tension may not be, or the pressure may not be quite as extreme. And that's, from a market perspective, why we hold a little bit more optimism to say, while we're all worried about it today, and look, this may not be an easy settlement to get to, if I take a narrow market view, arguably, this is, to some degree at least, in the price.
Okay, and maybe another way to look at it, among all of our concerns, this is not top of list. We have bigger fish to fry, more things to worry about from an Indian market perspective. Maybe that is one perspective as well. Abhay, what can India do, and how crucial is it that even optically India is weathering this storm? Because he keeps talking about India. It's not that he doesn't. In every speech, we played that out as well. He keeps mentioning Indian tariffs as an example. It's not as if it's the biggest trading partner for the US either.
No, we are not, and even whatever we do, what we export to US is very different from what we import from US. I mean, we are importing stuff that is advanced technology, defense, electronics, consumer electronics. What we're exporting is textiles, low value added items. So there is a disparity anyways. I don't think we are a threatening partner at all to the US. So that is a good thing. But I think, again, as I said, Tamanna, onus is on us now. I would like to see our companies announce that they are going to use this opportunity to actually set up manufacturing operations in the US, which is highly possible. I mean, this whole conversation of onshore versus offshore and doing it cheaper onshore, I think that is what is going to change for a long period of time. I will not be surprised to see Indian companies, pharma companies, for instance, saying that they are setting up or acquiring captive manufacturing operations in the US to cater to the US business, partly exports from India, partly made in US. And I think that is what Trump is frankly angling for from everybody. He would want the Chinese companies to come in US and manufacture. And that is what we also did, Tamanna. Like, for Samsung, Google, Apple, under the PLI scheme, we told them that, look, Indian market is open for you to come in and sell, but you make it in India. And I think that experiment has worked out well. So probably it is a replication of that in the US also, that if the global companies want to sell in the US, they better have manufacturing presence in US, and they should have job creation in the US, and not just see US as a consumption market where they are making high margins. So I think that is what is going to play out over the next 6 months.
So from the Indian perspective and the equity perspective, which are the kinds of companies that will be impacted most negatively and maybe positively as well, Abhay, with the current situation?
Yeah, I don't, frankly, if I just look beyond this, I don't think there is going to be a big degree of change for any companies. I think the opportunity clearly exists for our pharma companies right now, to not only just have factories in India that are US FDA compliant and selling to US markets, but also use this as an opportunity to be more proactive, look at some acquisition opportunities. So pharma is a space that I would expect to benefit from this and be pushed into action rather than maintaining the status quo. On the negative side, frankly, other than some textile companies that are already coming under pressure because of the tariff, I think the textile, garment, and the companies that export to chains like Home Depot and Target and Lowe's and Walmart, I think they are the ones that will get negatively impacted. But I think if you look at it, the opportunity space for Indian companies to actually get going and do something and use this as an opportunity is far more right now than the negative part of tariffs.
Yeah, but the immediate pain point is being seen. Manpreet, just your take on which bucket of companies will do relatively well?
So actually, one of our preferences is in India and elsewhere to focus on more domestically oriented sectors, because if you're trying to avoid any unexpected volatility from tariffs, that's an obvious first place to look. So if I look through our preferred sectors in India, I mean, financials is perhaps one good example of that, right? Where the drivers are much more domestic growth and credit quality driven, domestic yield curve driven. And it's more a function of that rather than being in the immediate line of fire, which some other more trade oriented sectors might be. As a similar approach we've taken across US and China markets, where domestic markets in China or small caps in the US tend to have a much larger share exposure to the domestic economy. In India, preference is still though towards the large caps. I think small and mid caps face a different set of challenges, but it's really trying to keep that domestic lens until some of the storm blows over on the tariff side. I think that's the way we sort of address tariffs, the tariff risk in front of us.
Okay, so a lot of it up in the air right now. No one quite knows where things will settle as far as tariffs are concerned. But even as you're hearing all of this and wondering what it means for India, relatively will be safe. We don't actually have that huge quantum of trade from the US. Reciprocal tariffs may hit in the end of the day US consumers more. For example, if we're exporting pharma, it's them who are going to have to pay higher prices for drugs. Having said that, I want to thank all of you for joining us on the show today, and tell our viewers to comment on the topic that we've spoken about. Tell us what you think, and we'll be back, same place, same time tomorrow for more on The Big Question.